Hello and welcome back to Raise the Trident. My name is Jake, and today we are at the exact third of the way through season mark right now, literally 0.333 on the calendar. We are 28 and 26 for the Seattle Mariners 2024 season, and I thought this would be a good time to kind of do a bit of a state of the union on what is going on in Mariners land. We're going to cover all the different bases here, and I'm actually not going to do this alone. We also have Jay from Jay's Trident podcast with me to help me go through what is, in my opinion, a lot of different stuff that we need to go over today. So yeah, thanks Jay for stopping by and being a part of this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Always good to have these discussions, and I enjoy getting to do it with other people so we can bounce ideas off of each other. So it's going to be really fun and excited to talk about this team.
Yep. So yeah, this is going to be a state of the union here. Like I said, we are a third of the way exactly through the season, and this is going to be coming out right before game one in our 4-game stretch against the Houston Astros at home, which in my opinion is the most important series of potentially the season at this point. And the reason I say that is because we are depending on if the Astros win tonight. So I don't know that necessarily yet. We're either going to be 4 or 5 games or potentially only 3 games ahead of them in the ALS standings. In my opinion, they're kind of our closest competition with the Rangers and how beat up they are. So with that, I think it's really important that we kind of cover what is everything that's going on with the Seattle Mariners right now, which is quite a lot. I think you would agree with me on that.
Yeah, this team is not lacking for just, we kind of joked about this in the DMs. Like, this is a pretty good team for content because there's a lot to talk about with this team. And despite everything, they are in first place. We are talking about a first place baseball team. So it just makes it all the more fascinating to really discuss this team right now. So, yeah, there's a lot to get into with this baseball club.
Exactly. And before we get into it, and we're gonna break it down into categories. We're gonna start with the offense, then the starting pitching, then the relief pitching, and then the front office stuff, because there's, trust me, a lot to talk about as far as moves go. But before we get into that, I do think it's important to preface this discussion with a couple things. First, we have to understand that me and Jay don't have inside information about what's going on in the club's locker room or anything like that. We have no way of knowing that. We have the same amount of resources that everyone else has, which is Fangraphs, Savant, whatever you want to
Yep.
call it, right? So in essence, us and the public, in my opinion, have maybe 20% knowledge of everything that's going on within the organization in the clubhouse, and 20% is probably pushing it, to be honest with you. So we need to preface that in everything we talk about is only what we know of and what we have access to. So there are things that could be different that are going on, little things that we aren't aware of, whether that's players are working on specific things, what the org sees in certain players and keeping them around. Maybe there's something that we just don't know, because we also have to understand they have way more and advanced metrics than we have access to. So I got to put that out there. I feel like we just have to add that nuance to this discussion, because I feel like when we're talking about these things on Twitter, right, we don't have that nuance and we don't understand that we truly don't know everything about what's going on. So this is just our best guesses off of the available knowledge that we have. Do you kind of agree with that?
Oh, I could not agree more. Could not agree more. We say all the time, it's why I don't jump into things too much and get too angry, because there are so many little things behind the scenes. And that's not me or Jake saying like can't be critical. We've been critical of the team as well. But there are things that you're never going to know about. And if we know about it, they probably know about it too. It's even kind of like discussions, well, why are they bringing in Trent Thornton here? He's not good with inherited runners. Like, well, they know that too. They have all the information. So there's always a little something extra that they know that we don't. So, no, I think that's totally fair. And it's just, and I also preface by saying too to people, we don't work for the Mariners as well. So
No.
it is not our fault when things go wrong. We're just talking about them. So
Yeah.
I like to use that preface as well.
At the end of the day, me and Jay are fans of the team. If you feel like we are being too overly optimistic or positive about things we're saying, we don't work for them. We're not paid off by the Mariners. We're not unpaid interns for the Mariners. And if you feel like we're being too negative, you have to understand we're coming at this in a sense of nuance and in a sense of we want this team to be the best team it can be. And unfortunately, these guys are well, not unfortunately, these guys are making. I'm going to cut that out for sure. these guys, these guys are making millions of dollars. In my opinion, I feel like it's fair to be critical of certain things that happen, whether that's front office moves or the players themselves or the coaching, whatever have you. But let's get right into it. First, we need to cover the offense for the Seattle Mariners, which in my opinion is the more overarching issue when you think of all the issues with the Mariners right now, but it's also the most difficult to fix. Generally, it's been kind of shaky. I mean, there's been a couple games here and there where they really show how good they can possibly be. They did it literally today, which I guess when you see this is yesterday against the Nationals in game 3. Pretty good offensive day, I will say. And games like games 1 and 2 in New York are other instances of that. Maybe not the first 8 innings of game 1 in New York, but game 2 I thought was a really solid day overall for the offense. But we're going to go over a couple numbers here. I plug these out of the team leaderboards here. So starting with the good stuff, because we're going to get into the bad stuff, but the good stuff, they are 10th in home runs, which cool. They have some slug there. And out of all the numbers I did, that was about it. They're really high in home runs, and we already kind of know that this is kind of was the case last year. This team is built to slug a bit, and if they aren't hitting homers, they are usually having a pretty rough time with it. So yeah, do you kind of feel the same way with them?
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of been their MO the last few years. It's kind of that old maybe Moneyball type style, work the walks, hit the home runs. And listen, it's the home run is the great equalizer, right? Like if you can hit a lot of home runs, you can get back in games really fast, really quickly. You get a couple base runners and boom, you can break a game wide open. They're just kind of missing, and like you said, they're 10th in home runs. They're just kind of missing that in between. I'm not sure where they rank in walks and stuff like that, but it just not getting some of those big hits. That they've done better since early in the year at like working the count, getting base runners. They have their moments where they don't and everything, but they seem to be missing who's going to put that ball in the gap. Who's going to get that big double to clear the bases. Today, or yesterday against the Nationals, they did. They had a great offensive day, 9 runs, take that all the time. But I don't think they're that far off offensively. I think there's been some good signs. They're just like, they get closer and then they seem to kind of take a step back too. Seems to happen a bunch of times as well. So, and to your point early on that you said when we first started talking about the offense here, it really is, I know there's been a lot of focus on the bullpen and we'll get to that, but the offense has by far been the biggest issue. And like you said, it's the hardest one to fix right now, in my opinion. There's no one thing you can do to just fix it. I think it's going to take a lot of these guys just have to play better. I mean, you've got 5 or 6 guys massively underperforming. You can go make a trade. I'm all for it. They're going to have to do that at some point. But even with that, until Polanco, Garver, Julio to an extent, Ty's been better recently, but just overall, until those guys get better, there's not one bat that's going to fix it, in my opinion.
Yeah. So to kind of get into some of the not so nice stuff here with the Seattle Mariners. So some of the stats I was looking at, they are 20th, and I will also preface this. These are stats as of yesterday. So 2 days ago from when you've seen this. So to yesterday's game where we scored 9 runs may have changed these around a little bit. Who knows? But regardless, not enough for it to really change the standings too much. Right now, this offense is 20th in WRC plus at 96. They are 24th in hits, 24th in team OPS, 26th in batting average, 30th in K percentage, so dead last, of course, first in strikeouts. And it's not even that they're necessarily unlucky. They are 12th in BABIP. So obviously not stuff that you want to see at all. And as far as their lineup goes, I mean, there's just a lot of guys who are underperforming. I know Julio is probably going to come up a little bit later in this episode here, because we have to talk about him. He's been pretty polarizing this year, but guys like Mitch Garver, Jorge Polanco, a lot of guys that are just underperforming where you would like them to be. Garver's looked a little bit better recently, I will say, but when you look at all those stats and where they rank out of the MLB, not at all where you want them to be. And it's really interesting to me because, and I, you may disagree with me, but when this offseason was over and I took into account all the things that they did, granted, we always have to give the front office for last offseason the bit of the slack of they didn't have some unlimited budget like a Dodgers or whatever. They were very hamstrung to what they had budget wise. I thought they did a really good job. I thought they put a lot of or brought a lot of good players into Seattle on the offensive side. Jorge Polanco I thought was going to be a game changer. Mitch Garver I was expecting, although he can be very hit or miss per season, if the ceiling is really high if he has a good season. Mitch Haniger, didn't really know. That's kind of more of a vibes thing, if I'm going to be honest with you. Wasn't really expecting him to come in and just, mash the ball and put up a super high WRC plus or anything. But I still thought that they did a good job in getting guys who have been at least somewhat consistent recently. Luke Raley is also another one. I know there's some question marks with him, but when you're a third of the way through the season and you're ranking in the bottom half or even the bottom end of a lot of these really key categories, it's hard not to be frustrated and confused. And that's where I found myself a lot in the last week, of just feeling like what happened? Like, they got these guys that I believed in, thought they were going to do great, and like some of them, man, they haven't gotten anything going. Especially like a Jorge Polanco, right? He's been probably one of your worst hitters so far. So yeah, where are you kind of at with how this offense is doing to the expectations that I felt were kind of high going into the season?
I think confused might be the most perfect word you could use to describe this offense right now. And I've been baffled by it too, because these are all guys that should be much better than what they're giving you. I'm with you. Jorge Polanco has been one of the most consistent hitters in baseball the last few years. He's had some injury stuff, but he has been, a 750 or better OPS guy. You made the point on Mitch Garver. I didn't expect him to come here and maybe put up an 870 OPS, but after last year where you had Tommy La Stella opening day DH, I was like, okay, now we've got a legitimate DH in here that can play every day. And he's somehow been worse than Tommy La Stella. I mean, I don't think he's been that bad, but it's just amazing how this happens. And, I'm with you. I think it's just a little confusion. I mean, I will say, like, with Julio, we've now seen it kind of all 3 years where he's been off to a bit of a slow start. It may just be kind of part of his game. Ty France, I think we hoped for that bounce back going to Driveline, and maybe he is showing some signs of it here the last few weeks. But Ty wasn't great last year either. I think I remember we talked before the season, you were a little iffy on Haniger. You weren't too sure about that one. And I think that's come to fruition a little bit. Now, I think injuries have hurt too, where, Canzone got hurt, so you had to play Haniger every day. I don't think that helped. I'm hoping getting back to more of a part-time role is going to help Mitch Haniger. Josh Rojas, despite some recent slumps, has been pretty solid overall. Cal's been good. Tough series for him in Washington, but been good overall. But yeah, I really don't know, and I don't have an answer for it. I know some people say it's coaching, but to me, like Polanco and Garver, I just don't think these guys came over. The team signed them to do what they've done. And I don't think they would have been like, oh, hey, we liked you, we signed you and traded for you, but we're going to totally change up how you play baseball. I think they probably just said, hey, do what you do. Just that's what we want you to come in here and do. Produce the way you produced. And I mean, Polanco now can't hit a fastball to save his life. He's been a guy that's crushed him his entire career. I think there may be some injury issues that are just, well, we know there are. Polanco missed a ton of time with the hamstring injury, and it happened again in Washington as well. I think it's just bothering him. He may just need a good couple weeks off. And to your point, Garver shows signs, but then kind of just dips back down. So I'm hoping when the weather heats up, these guys heat up a little bit. I think there's always going to be some inconsistencies with this offense because of how much they rely on the long ball and everything. But we see it when they get going, they can be a really dangerous offensive team. They've shown signs of that. And I hope we just get more of those games like we did against Washington here for game 3 than we do every other type game. The other two games we saw in this Washington series, which were, difficult to watch.
Yeah, and I do think it is important, even when we're highlighting the negatives in the offense, we need to highlight some of the guys who are doing positive things. Dylan Moore has been huge and has really carried us on our backs a little bit, especially with JP Crawford when he went out. I don't think you can really put enough words into how huge his performance has been since then. Dude is just absolutely raking right now. He was still, hitting the ball hard today. I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. Luke Raley had a huge few weeks for us too, especially when they started playing him every day. I think they need to start doing that again. I don't know why we keep sitting him against lefties, but whatever. He's been above average for lefties. I don't know. And then, yeah, Josh Rojas was huge for a couple weeks span. I know he's kind of slowed down a bit, but I do believe that he will continue to be a pretty solid player for us. So we need to highlight those guys too, because you have to highlight the positives as well as the negatives and be reasonable about both. So that's what we're hoping to do here. It does lead me, and you mentioned the coaching, into a very interesting conversation about the offense I wanted to have, in the sense of yesterday I made a tweet about Jorge Polanco and him struggling against the fastball. It gained quite a bit of traction, and I got a lot of different comments about what could be going on with Jorge Polanco. Part of it was because the whole part of his career, he has been above average WRC plus against four seam fastballs. And now he was like 44 yesterday, or sorry, yeah, as of yesterday, he was a 44 WRC plus this year against a four seam fastball. A lot of people are thinking or saying that it is a coaching issue or the Mariners curse, whatever that means, whatever. Like, that's so ambiguous. I don't know how you could use that as an answer, but whatever. But it does lead into what I think is a very interesting conversation to have about, when do you start blaming the coaching? When do you start thinking that maybe there needs to be some changes in the coaching staff? Especially on the offensive side, because trust me, I get where people are coming from, in the sense of, it feels like we get all these free agents who are pretty solid, and then they come here and they just go down in the tank and have really rough seasons, and then they leave and they get revitalized again. Almost the exact opposite of our pitching staff, which is interesting. But it leads into a very interesting conversation of, where do you start blaming the coaching? And I have to go back to the preface I said before we started these conversations, that we don't know everything that's going on. But my personal take on that, and I'd love to hear yours as well, is I think you can criticize coaching for in-game moves, mainly when you're talking about Scott, and if he's pulling starters too early, which I know was a big deal yesterday, or the relief choices, positional choices, handedness stuff in lineups, all that stuff, I think are reasonable times when you can criticize the coaching staff. Or I know Manny Acta gets a lot of slack for his rough sends. That's another example. When it comes to a player's performance, I think one thing that we have to realize is that, one, these guys are being paid millions of dollars, a lot of money, and with that, they have their own, almost every player has their own team, if you will, around them, whether it's personal coaches and specific strength and conditioning people. And especially in the off season is when those guys get a lot of time, not with the organization. They have their own people they go to work out the kinks. So in my opinion, when it comes to performance, it is really hard for me to not put it on the player more than I do the coaching staff or the hitting department or the offensive coordinator or Jarrett DeHart. I think you have to put more of the blame on the player themselves, because it is ultimately up to the player to perform and figure out what's wrong with them, because the coaching staff and the hitting department or whatever is going to give them tips, sure, and they're going to give them offensive strategies for a game or a specific pitcher, absolutely. But the hitting coach cannot hit for the player. They can't step into the box and hit a home run. Only the players can do that. Only the players can put those plans together. And if the player doesn't do that, then how can, like, what else can the coach do, is where I'm at with that. So I'm curious, what's your take about the whole discussion with coaching, and especially on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I think you make some great points overall. And to kind of preface what you said in the beginning, I have no problem with people questioning if it's coaching either. I get people in my comments asking. I think it's totally fair to wonder because, like you said, players come here, they have good track records, and they just seem to struggle. I will say, I think we tend to notice the ones that struggle more than the ones that do better. Like Josh Rojas has come over and been really good. Ty France, yeah, I know the last couple years have been great, but came over and did really well. Cal Raleigh, Tom Murphy, so there is actually a lot of good positives as well. But I think we take those, I don't mean me and you, but just everybody, and we kind of dismiss it when it's good, but we focus on the negative a lot of times too. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I just, listen, the coaches are ultimately like responsible. If this team falls flat on their face, they lose 90 games, they don't make the playoffs. Yeah, there's probably going to be changes. Just it's a results-based analysis at the end of the day. But in terms of like breaking down the individual performances, I agree with you. And like I said, Jorge Polanco, Mitch Garver have good track records. I highly doubt they showed up to spring training and they go, hey, you're really good at hitting fastballs. We're going to totally change your approach against fastballs now. Like maybe a little bit more with the guys they develop. I could understand maybe a little more criticism with Julio and stuff with the slow starts because he's been in their system from day one, and maybe there's something there they didn't do. But with the free agents, I don't think they're telling these guys to do anything different. I think they're signing the dotted line going, you know what we want you to be? The same player you've been your entire career. And you brought up another really good point, too. These guys spend so much time with other hitting instructors in the offseason, and working on stuff with their own personal trainers. And it is something that I think at the end it goes back to your very beginning. We're not privy to everything. I don't know what Jared DeHart, Brant Brown, Scott Service are telling Jorge Polanco and Mitch Garver. I highly doubt, though, that they have, like you said, they're giving them the advice. The players have to play. I've said in football, like if DK Metcalf drops a wide open pass, that wasn't Pete Carroll's fault. You can't, blame the coaches for that. There's things to get on coaching for 100%. But I don't see any evidence that this is a coaching issue. I guess I think it's a fair question for people to ask 100%. To me, I think more with Polanco, there's probably injuries. I think that hamstring is bothering him way more than it's being let on. I think he's really trying to play through it. Garver, I'm not really sure, to be honest, what might be the issue there, because it looks like he's coming out of it, a lot. Then it kind of slows back down a little bit. And then the rest of the guys, like, Haniger was, and you know what? Haniger, you could put actually into the positives from years past. Haniger came over to Seattle and was a really good hitter. J.P. Crawford's developed into a really nice hitter. Dylan Moore. So there's actually a lot of positives, with the guys they've developed. So I think the fan base tends to kind of go towards the negative, which I get. Like, we're Mariners fans, we've been through a lot, so I can certainly sympathize with that. But I don't think it falls on coaching. I'm with you on that. I think it's just the players. They've got to be better or they've got to be healthy, whichever one it is. And I think they will. I do still believe these guys are good hitters that will get out of it. It might be coaching. Like, again, I will never dismiss that entirely. I don't know. But I just can't imagine that these guys came over to Seattle and they completely changed their approach. That would just be my take on it.
Yeah. So moving on into the last person that I really wanted to talk about when we're talking about the offensive stuff, is we have to talk about Julio Rodriguez. Got to put it very clear here because he's so divisive in this fan base talking about him. Julio is not having a bad season at all. It's just and especially what we saw yesterday in Game 3 against the Nationals. He changed the game yesterday. He basically kind of won us the game if you really think about it. He had a homer, he had 4 RBIs. That's the Julio that we have been looking for almost all season, it feels like, and the Julio that we know. But it's not necessarily like his overall numbers that I want to talk about. I think the thing with Julio that I feel is so divisive is more of a consistency thing. And we talk about this. You've said it earlier. This is like the third straight season where we're saying, oh, he's got that slow start. Will he'll come around later on in the season. And trust me, I know Julio's going to be a great player, and I know that he's going to have a good stat line when the season comes to a close. But it's been, you can't say it hasn't been a bit disappointing on some of the performance parts there. It just really feels like, for me, Julio is the kind of guy and who you're putting up on this pedestal in this club to be the guy who like changes games and wins you some games. And I can only count maybe a few games so far this year that it felt like he truly changed the outlook of the game on. So I'm curious kind of where you stand with Julio as far as, should people be disappointed where he's at now? Should people be okay with where he's at? And I guess just the whole, slow start debate and kind of, I don't know. It's hard to like word the stuff with Julio because it's so complex and there's so many different things to talk about. But yeah, I guess just what's your take on Julio Rodriguez so far in 2024?
Well, you are not kidding about him being probably the most polarizing guy, because I have gone on rants defending Julio and I've gotten ripped for it. And then I've been like, hey, Julio was awful today. And I've gotten ripped for not like backing Julio. So it's kind of a can't win argument with him sometimes. I thought you made a great point to start out. Julio is not actually having a terrible season. I think even with his current numbers, and this isn't taking Sunday into account, did he had a great game? I think he's on pace for like 4 wins above replacement level by F4. So, I mean, he is not, even with like a 650 OPS, he's giving you gold glove defense in center field. That is not a terrible baseball player. The issue is that it's not what you're paying Julio Rodriguez to do, and it's not what you want him to be. You want him to be a cornerstone face of your franchise, not, Randy Wynn in the outfield, essentially. A decent player that's solid, but not a superstar. It looks like he might be getting going now. Back-to-back home runs. Really solid seeing him drive the baseball here. Really nice game on Sunday. I'm hoping this is the start of it for Julio. Listen, I think if the Mariners want to get to where we want them to be, win a World Series, we'll put that as the ultimate goal. Julio has to be better. I think that goes without saying. You need Julio to be what you saw last year in August. Now, I don't expect that to be throughout the whole season. He'd be the greatest player that ever walked the face of the earth if he repeated last August every month. But, spread that out a little bit. I think most fans are just looking for a little more consistency. I don't think we need Julio to be a 1,000 OPS for the first 2 months, but it'd be nice if he could roll out like a 745, something where it's decent. It's not superstar level, but if he has one really amazing month, he's back into that category. And I mean, Julio is such a special player. I mean, last year, his August almost carried him to an MVP. I mean, I think he finished 4th or 5th in the AL and F4, and that's a league that included Shohei Ohtani last year. So, I mean, he can be this special player. And I don't want to I sometimes feel like I put a lot on him too. Like, oh, Julio, he's got to be the best. He's got to be the best. He's 23. And I think you were talking about it maybe with Mariners Muse today. I'm not sure on Twitter, but like, how much this guy cares. I will never question Julio's desire to be better. He wants to be the face of this franchise, and not in like a selfish way, in a legitimate help the team win way. I mean, you see him after that base hit he had today against Washington, how fired up he is because he's helping the team win. I don't think anybody wants it more than Julio does. Just need a little more consistency. I'm with you. I think at the end of the day, if we fast forward to the end of the year, I think his stat line is going to look fine. It's just, I want it to start, and I want it to start, ASAP. So it is very polarizing, though, because he has not been terrible by any means. And I've had some people saying bench him and stuff like that. No, Julio is still the best guy to be out there. And so what are you going to do? Bench him and play Cade Marlowe every day in center field? I like Cade Marlowe, but that's not going to make you better. Best bet is that Julio just keeps playing, gets consistent at bats, and comes out of this. And maybe he's starting to. Nice finish to the series for him in DC. So at least I think we're talking about this as Julio is in a little bit of a positive stretch right here in baseball.
Yeah. And yeah, what I was saying on Twitter earlier is, that if we're frustrated about how he's playing, Julio is 10 times more frustrated about how he's playing. He knows that he, so far this season, hasn't necessarily been good enough. And it's so weird to say that about a 4-win player, like you said, or potentially more. But I think it's okay to rightfully criticize his slow starts. It's frustrating. I'm sorry, but I was saying this yesterday in a spaces, so 2 days ago, whatever, that in my opinion, for Julio to really get into that category of elite MVP people, he needs to start, he needs to stop having these Aprils and Mays of feels like almost zero production, and he needs to be more consistent. And I don't need Julio to be hitting 17 hits in 4 games. I don't need that all the time. I just want it, like, if it's more spread out, in my opinion, he's going to, I guess, change games more often than he does. And I think he can absolutely be that player where he's just a lot more consistent. I just had someone ask me the other day, would you prefer he has his hot streaks towards the end of the season or early in the season? I would probably say towards the end of the season, when you're really getting in that stretch, makes sense. But I would prefer option 3, where he's just solid all year. It's kind of where I'm at
Yes,
with it.
yes.
So that's where I'm at with Julio. I do think it's fine to criticize him, but it's also fine to understand the dude is 23. I do think with age and with more seasons under his belt, he will start to be that more consistent player and really figure out how to work through his kinks a lot faster at this point. But that's kind of where I want to go off of the offense in general. I guess the last thing I will say about the offense, as far as how do we fix this, the first thing I will say is when it comes to all the things that are up with the Mariners right now, although the offense is the biggest issue and the most overarching issue, and the issue that is going to lead to more or less success, however you fix it, or if it gets worse or better, it's also a harder issue to fix this early in the season. You're probably not going to see any big moves, until closer to the deadline. I mean, people in the comments might be like, Luis Ariz, blah, 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 whatever. That's like an outlier. Those types of trades tend to not happen that early in May. So I wouldn't expect that to happen soon, but I do think we are going to see some movement closer to the trade deadline. So yeah, I guess kind of what's your final thoughts on the offense, and how do you think, we could fix this, or what needs to be fixed in this offense at this point?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the trades. I say it all the time too, that, and it takes two to tango. You gotta, yes, like the Luis Urias trade happened. There's always one or two. Hey, the Mariners a couple years ago acquired Carlos Santana, but Santana actually wasn't doing that well in Kansas City when they acquired him. It was kind of a fill-in for Ty France. So I mean, I'm sure there's somebody like that out there that you could go get, but it's just, it would be more, that trade was more to, Ty France was hurt, so you just wanted that first baseman in there that could fill in the void and not be a train wreck. Well, we need legitimate upgrades right now, and I just don't think a lot of teams are going to be doing that, or they're going to be asking for the farm right now, and I think you're going to have to wait till at least June to see something. And I also think, too, if I'm sitting in Jerry and Justin's shoes, I'm like, okay, do I want to upgrade a DH? Yeah, I want Garver to be better and more production, but I also signed Garver to a 2-year deal. I'm not going to just give up after 2 months and go, this guy can't do it anymore. Ty France has started to bounce back a little bit. Now, I know we're looking at 2 years of France not being great, but this road trip was really solid for Ty France. He homers today. Are we willing to now just be like, oh, nope, done? Or maybe go, let's give another month and see what Ty can do. And I know Some people don't want to be patient with that, and I get it. I 100% do. But, you do have a little bit of time. You do have a 3-game lead in this division. I get that can be gone. That might be gone on Wednesday for all we know. But you do have a little wiggle room to give these guys some time. Maybe get Jorge Polanco fully healthy. You got JP Crawford back in the lineup now. He's starting to get his timing back a little bit. You get Canzone's back. Rayleigh's hitting better. I think you're going to see another few weeks where they kind of let this lineup play out and hope it gets to where it needs to be. And then I think you'll start seeing moves mid to late June if it's not getting, the offense isn't going right. And then for sure by the trade deadline, 100%. But yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. I don't think there's a trade out there right now unless you want to go, acquire a Carlos Santana, which fine. I mean, it could help, but that's not going to just fix the offense on its own. There's a lot of stuff that's got to happen.
Yep. And I'm not going to put out names necessarily for who we could go get because one, that I'm not very good at that stuff. I'll just put it that way. I'm not good at like thinking of who could we go get trade wise and how would that take up. So I'm not going to play above my strengths here. But yeah, I think that kind of puts a neat bow on the offensive side. Clearly it's been disappointing so far this year. There are things that absolutely need to be fixed, and I think things that will be fixed. But I also do believe that the talent is absolutely there for people to figure it out, hopefully sooner rather than later. But there's a lot of talent on the offensive side, in my opinion. I do think when they are all firing on all cylinders, this could be one of the better offenses in baseball, period. Might be a controversial take, whatever. I just, that's my 2 cents on that. So going out of the offense, we're going to go on to the pitching side, and we're going to break it up into 2 categories, starting pitching and relief pitching. We'll start with starting pitching first because I don't think this is going to take very long to talk about. In my opinion, starting pitching's been generally fine. It hasn't necessarily, I felt like, been outside of that 2.5, 3 week stretch where they were holding everyone to 2 runs or whatever for 20 straight starts, some ridiculous stat like that. They haven't necessarily played up, in my opinion, to this whole like, oh, they're one of the best rotations in baseball. I think they could do a lot better, and I do think there's the talent there. Obviously, you have Castillo, you have Kirby, Gilbert. Those 3 alone already is a pretty damn good start of your rotation. They just been kind of hit or miss, I feel like. And same thing with Bryce Miller. He's had his good starts this season. The splitter was looking, especially at the start of the season, really good, and it seemed to be playing off his fastball really well. Last few starts for him, as well as Gilbert and Kirby, have been a bit shaky, and so the consistency isn't fully there to where I would like it, but they've been generally fine. And Brian Wu has been I would say pretty good since he's came back. I can't wait until he doesn't have a pitch limit. That will be nice. But a couple stats to go over that I think are important. They are 13th in FIP. So whatever, they're middle of the pack there, but they're 13th in F4 at 4.1 at this point. They are 9th in starter ERA at 3.58, 6th in walks, 5th in strikeouts, and 1st in whip. So overall, like, fine numbers. They're not the ones losing us games more often than not. In every rotation, every guy is going to have those bad starts throughout the season. There's not really usually ever a pitcher immune to not having at least a couple of those. But overall, my thing with the starting pitching is just I'd like to be a little bit more consistent, but overall, think they've been solid enough. So kind of where are you at with the starting pitching?
Yeah, is that 13th in FIP? Is that all pitching? Or is that just the starters, or is that
That's
bullpen
just starters.
too?
We're only all the stats I just
Oh,
listed are only starting pitching related.
okay. So they have dropped a little bit because they were like 3rd or 4th in FIP. Last time I did a series preview, I always go over those numbers. I think they were 3rd or 4th. So they have dropped off a little bit there. I will admit that. But yeah, I think overall your point is spot on with it. I mean, there's been some shaky starts the last few times out. I will say they're facing they faced the Yankees, the Orioles, Minnesota a while back. Kansas City's been pretty good offensively. I think the Nationals are the only team they faced recently that don't have much of an offense. So it might just be, hey, you face the Yankees. And truthfully, excuse me, that Yankee series Like Judge and Soto just killed you. Like Bryce Miller start. He gave up, I think, 2 home runs to Soto and a home run to Aaron Judge. Now, you'd like for that not to happen, but like those guys are going to get you sometimes. Sometimes you can throw Barry Bonds, the best pitch in baseball. He's going to hit it out of the park, and you just got to tip your cap to those guys. So I think they're fine overall. They had that streak where they were just, like you said, the 23, whatever it was, starts in a row with 2 earned runs or less. They've cooled off a little bit since then. We all talked about it. I think we knew they weren't going to keep that up. They haven't been as lights out the last couple weeks, but they've still been fine. The only one that I've been a little bit frustrated with has probably been George Kirby. Just a few starts where it's just he's so in the strike zone that I do wonder if, like, and I hate to say, because it's like his biggest strength is just the fact that he does not walk anybody. But maybe nibble a little bit more. I thought he did that against Kansas City really well. He hit the corners really well in that start. And I think Kirby's going to be fine. Let me just put that on record. I have like no worries whatsoever with George Kirby. I don't have any worries with anybody in this rotation. Maybe Bryce Miller a little bit just because he cooled off second half of last year and he doesn't have a full season under his belt. But this staff is still one of the best in baseball. I would expect that 13th FIP to end the year in the top 5. And I cannot say enough about how good Brian Wu has looked since coming back from the injured list. And I'm with you. I'm looking forward to when he's been able to throw 90, 95 pitches in a start because, man, he is absolute. Like right now, I made a point in my post-game recap. Obviously, if we had game 1 of the series tomorrow, let's just say everybody's on equal rest. Yeah, I'm probably throwing Castillo. But, man, there'd be a part of me that would want to say Brian Wu, like right off the bat, because he has just been so lights out since coming back. Shutting down the Yankees lineup. Kansas City's a pesky lineup. He shut them down. Oakland's been okay. They have been great, but they've been better this year. And then Washington, who gave George Kirby fits on Friday, he shut them down today. So, yeah, no, I'm not worried about the rotation in the slightest. Like I said, they're on a little bit of a streak where they haven't been perfect, but I could not have any less concern about this starting staff. I still think it'll end the year as arguably the best in baseball.
Yep, I'm pretty much with you there. I don't foresee some big meltdown where all of a sudden they're just all struggling. I know we had the very start of the season, kind of a good week and a half where we had a rotation and a half of pretty bad starts in a row. But then it was followed up by one of the best stretches of starting pitching in, a long time. So it makes sense that they're a bit back to earth, especially like you said, a really tough road trip against some offensive juggernauts, specifically in Baltimore and in New York, the Yankees in particular. So it makes sense that they were struggling a bit with that. And now, you're going into the next month where I think they have a good chance of getting back on track again. Maybe not in this Houston series we're about to start, but you go against the Angels, Oakland, KC again, White Sox, Texas. I wouldn't say them. Cleveland could give you fits here and there, and then Miami. So, those 4 series, Angels, Oakland, KC, White Sox, Miami, all in 1 month, you have a pretty good shot at stealing a pretty decent amount of games there. So, yeah, starting pitching, I'm not necessarily worried about. I don't really think any of us are really worried about them. I will say, kind of to expand on your point with George Kirby, he's kind of the only one that I feel a bit shaky about, in the sense, and I kind of said this during the off season, and I've made it kind of clear. I'm not necessarily a super big high man on George Kirby, mainly due to the fact that I just think the fact that he doesn't have as much swing and whiff, or whatever, swing and miss in his game.
Same thing.
Yeah, swing and miss in his game worries me, frankly, and especially with not necessarily an elite defense behind you, it makes it a bit tougher for me. And I'm fine with him giving up a couple walks if it means he's on the corners a bit more. It's hard for me to say this because I saw his 12K performance against the Diamondbacks in person where he was really lights out. But that's the thing, is like Kirby has that in him. He has that. He has the start last year against Baltimore in him. He has game 3 ALDS from 2022 in him. He can be that guy. So it's like, I'm not going to say I'm out on Kirby. I'm not going to say I'm necessarily too worried about him. He's just, at the end of the day, he's a young pitcher that still has certain things to develop. It's the same thing with Logan Gilbert. Obviously, Bryce Miller and, Brian Wu are even younger than him. Same thing with Julio. Like, we have a lot of young, really good talent, but they still have things and holes in their game that they need to fix. So it's pretty much where it's at. But I think now we got to go into the bullpen, which I think is potentially, with the offense, is the most divisive part of this team right now. Going into this year, we thought we were going to have one of the best bullpens in baseball. And then Gregory Santos goes down, Matt Brash goes down for the whole year, unfortunately. And since then, it has been shaky, to say the least. At this point, we only have really one reliever that you can put full confidence in Andres Munoz. Everyone else is you kind of just hope they have a clean inning, and you count your lucky stars if they do. Some numbers to go on this. Good numbers. They are fourth in walks, so they're not walking very many people, with 59. They are sixth in whip, so they're good on that front. And they're I said sixth in whip and then ninth in whip on my screen. Whatever. They're sixth or ninth in whip. I don't know which one.
They're top 10. They're top 10.
Yeah, I don't know what number I think I was trying to do on that. However, they are 14th in ERA at 3.83. They are 26th in strikeouts. So they're not striking out a lot of people. They're 12th in FWAR, and they're dead last in shutdowns, which is a Fangraphs stat, as far as, I think, just holding on to the lead and shutting down the game, whatever. I don't know exactly all the metrics that go into that, but they're dead last, which isn't great, unfortunately. And I think it's the bullpen is a really interesting topic, because obviously, like I said, we go into this season thinking that our pitching staff as a whole, and especially our bullpen, is poised to do amazing things. And a lot has went wrong with that bullpen. Obviously, the two injuries. Gabe Spire has been not, other than the first month of the year, he's been having a pretty rough time. His ERA, I think, is over 4.5 at this point, maybe even higher. And you had a lot of very, I would put it lightly, strange front office decisions to construct this bullpen that we'll get into. But for who we do have right now, kind of what are your general thoughts about the relief pitching and, just general performance, what needs to be done?
Yeah, it really is a shame because you came into this year thinking we have got a three-headed monster at the back end of this bullpen to go along with one of the best starting staffs in baseball. You go 6 innings, you're not beating the Mariners. Now, obviously, nobody's going to win every single game like that, but Brash, Santos, and then Munoz, it doesn't get more lights out than that. And plus, Gabe Spire was really good last year. Trent Thornton did a nice job. So you had those guys behind them to be pitching in games where you're down by a run, or games that go into the 12th, 13th inning where you've got to bring in a reliever. So I felt really good about this bullpen. Listen, for what they've gone through injury-wise, I actually think they've survived fair. I know it sounds crazy. I don't think they've done a terrible job surviving it. I think they've done about as good as you could hope losing those guys. Now, it's gotten really ugly this road trip especially. But it's just, and then like you said, Gabe Spire, who in April, I was talking like, man, get this guy the All-Star game as a setup man. And he has just dropped off. His ERA is actually over 6 right now. And listen, I thought yesterday against Washington, he got a little BABIP'd to death. There was a couple bloopers that fell in against him, but it's just compound. It's just everything. It's, if his ERA was still 0.87, I'd throw it away, but it's not. I don't think Trent Thornton's terrible, but he's not getting out of situations with inherited runners. He's just not. He's always coming in and giving up a hit. And I think you just have guys that are more mid-level arms, kind of reading off the numbers you read off. None of those are terrible, but it's just very mid. And you went from a bullpen, by you, I just mean everybody, that we thought was going to be, arguably the best in baseball, to very mediocre. And then they just can't get on the same page. Like, last night it was Spire and Thornton, or the Saturday game, I should say. Sunday, Ryan Stanek, who's looked actually pretty good his last few outings. He gives up the home run to C.J. Abrams. Then Austin Voth actually pitches a great 8th inning. And I'm not saying this is going to happen. Then you go to Voth tomorrow in a tight spot and he gives up a run. So it's just, they can't seem to find the piece. Getting Taylor Saucedo back should hopefully help. That's a nice boost, and we'll talk about some of the weird roster stuff. Um, and Munoz is, thank goodness Munoz is back to 2022. Munoz was fine last year, just not as elite as we've seen him. Thank goodness Andres Munoz is back to what he was a couple years ago, because I don't even know where this bullpen would be if, he was actually the guy we were most concerned about with injuries coming into the year. And could you imagine if something happened where Munoz had to miss time right now? It would be a nightmare at the back end of this bullpen. So I think they've got some decent guys. They're just all pitching in situations that are a little bit bigger than they are in terms of what they can handle leverage wise.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with where you're at, and I will say with Andres Munoz, if you were to pick right now an MVP on the offensive side, in the pitching side, offensive side, it's Dylan Moore. Relief pitching or pitching in general, it's been Andres Munoz. He's been huge to have at least that one guy that you can go to and know for almost the exact certainty, pretty much other than Milwaukee, that he is going to lock it down and get it done. But yeah, it's just been so strange how it's really tough, the whole Spire thing and the fact that he's struggling. I'm not necessarily going to write him off yet. I think obviously we know what he has in him. I don't know what's going on with him and why he's struggling so much recently. But after that, like with Ryan Stanek today, or Sunday's game against the Nationals, gave up the lead, right? Like in my opinion, at least on this road trip, it has definitely felt like the bullpen has lost us a couple games. You can make the argument that our offense has been pretty bad too, on especially the last two games in New York and the first two games in Washington, which yeah, you pretty much can say that, like, yeah, they've not pulled their weight either. But it is really tough going into a seventh inning with a couple run lead, and then it just feels like almost immediately you're now down again. And I tweeted out today, and I stand by this. Like, I'm sorry, but Jerry better be on the phones, and we better be having someone come in at least at some point in this Houston series to be that reinforcement. It needs to be a high leverage arm too. Like, it doesn't need, not talking Mike Bauman. We need a high leverage arm to at least have that person to go to in the eighth. Because the thing with Munoz too, right? Like, he's had now multiple times this season where he's had to work 5-6 outs to get his save. That's not sustainable, but it's the only thing you can do with the bullpen in the state it's at right now. So you need to get someone in for that eighth inning to give Munoz the rest where he can just come in for the ninth and get it done. Or like they were kind of doing at the start of the year, putting Munoz in the eighth if it calls for it, and having that person in the ninth that's also a high leverage arm, right? So I'm hoping that in the next few days, we're getting something going, because I said this with the offense in the sense of, with the trade deadline, you're going to see things more closer to the deadline happen, because it takes a lot longer for teams to give up offensive pieces. That's not the same for relievers, in my opinion. I think teams that are especially really out of it, like Miami, or can't really say Oakland's out of it, but I mean, unless unless they're ridiculous on the front office side, being like, well, maybe we'll gear up for it, like whatever, they could do that. You have teams that should be able to give away relievers and be fine with it. I'm not going to name certain names, but a couple that have came up is Austin Adams. I've heard Tanner Scott. I've said Tanner Scott a couple times from the Marlins. But you need someone, because especially after today, your bullpen literally almost lost you this game today. You had to have Julio go nuts to win this game today. So they need to, like, soon. Like, I even said, I want to go to bed tonight having, I want to wake up to that Medium article from Mariners PR of a move being made. It just needs to happen. But yeah, that leads me in, though, to another part of this bullpen, not just the performance, but some of the very interesting moves the front office has made in the wake of this. And I do want to preface this, because it is fair, that I don't envy the front office's job to figure out this bullpen. I know you said that earlier on Twitter too. Very difficult having two of your big three-headed monster going into the season, go out one of them for the whole season and most of next season potentially. And you don't even know if you're going to get an inning out of Santos this year. You hope so. And even then, with Santos coming back, who knows if he's going to be for sure good or not. But some of the moves have been interesting. The first one, I think, interestingly, felt like united the fan base for one of the first times in a long time, was the Tyson Miller DFA. I think we can both agree that just didn't really make sense. And now he's on the Cubs and he's absolutely shoving. Kind of what were your thoughts with the Tyson Miller DFA and when that happened?
Yeah, I think now we have two things. I think John Stanton and the Tyson Miller DFA are the two things this fan. I love when the fan base is united. I would love nothing more than all of us to be at the bar celebrating a World Series win. No, it was just like, and listen, I always try to defend these situations from the front office because I think sometimes people go, too far one way and go, oh my gosh, they're stupid. How could they do? I'm like, okay. I try to take a step back and look at what their thought process is through this. And that's why I said, I don't really envy this because it's a tough situation. I didn't understand DFAing Tyson Miller when you could have just optioned Cody Bolton. I don't think Tyson Miller would be saving this bullpen or anything. And I think when the dust settles on this season, do I think we're going to look back and go, man, Tyson Miller? Probably not. But he was someone that was pitching pretty well for a bullpen that's not very good right now. And I mean, you ended up getting Slaughter back in a trade, so that's fine. Maybe Slaughter contributes something this season. Who I don't know, probably not. But it just seemed like a very odd move. It would be a move that if they had Brash and Santos healthy, I'd probably wouldn't even bat an eye at, honestly. But they're kind of doing some of these roster moves as if they've got an elite bullpen, it seems like a little bit. I will say when they DFA'd Miller, I think Spire was still fine and pitching well. So they probably looked, well, we got Gabe Spire, Stanek's okay. Thornton was even, I think, better at that point. I think it was before Thornton started really just not being able to get out of any tight situation possible. So I'm thinking that's some of what went into it for them. But I wouldn't even be shocked looking back if you got Jerry and Justin candidly, and they would probably say, yeah, I think if we could go back, we just would have optioned Cody Bolton. And then just to go back to your point a little bit, if I can, I think you're spot on with the trade, and I have no issue going and getting a Mike Baumann. Throw someone in the pile, see what happens. But you need a legitimate setup guy, someone that is proven at the MLB level that they can get high leverage situation outs. Not a developmental piece. Again, no problem with the Baumann trade overall. Fine, throw another guy in the pile. You never know. Maybe it's another Justin Topa situation. Totally fine with that, but they need somebody else. Because I was even questioning today, do you bring Munoz into that seventh inning? I mean, that's your tight situation. It's 4-1. You've got the tying run at the plate. Do you think about maybe going to Munoz in those spots and saying, listen, and I know people go, well, what do you do later in the game? Well, you hope Munoz gets out of it. You add on runs, and then you go to Voth and someone else to finish it up. But they might have to get, if they're not going to make that move, or maybe the move isn't there to be made, I don't know. You're going to have to, I think, get a little creative here. And you might have to bring in Munoz into these situations and go, listen, Munoz gets out of it. We're up 4-1 still. Austin Voth pitches the eighth and Stanek pitches the ninth. And we hope that gets the job done. Because right now it's just not working with how they're managing it. But yeah, going back to the roster stuff. Yeah, I didn't get it. I thought Miller was decent, and I think he could be helping the team right now.
Yeah, and then today, Taylor Saucedo came back, which is really good news. However, the corresponding move for that was they optioned Edward Bizardo, I think that's how you say it, down to AAA Tacoma, which was met with its own amount of why Bizardo of all people, mainly because now you have 3 lefties in your bullpen for whatever reason, because you could have optioned Kirby or DFA'd Kirby Sneed, which I think is what people thought was going to happen. Sneed currently has a 5.79 ERA in 7 games. He's only pitched 4.2 innings in 7 games, so clearly he's hasn't got out of all of those innings, and a 2.36 WHIP for so far this year. So not a great time so far for him. He's certainly not a high leverage arm. So didn't really understand why you send down a righty and now you have 3 lefties in your bullpen. I think a bullpen's fine with having one kind of lower leverage lefty and one higher leverage lefty. So it doesn't really make sense to me. I don't think it makes sense for anyone right now, really, because I mean, you DFA'd Tyson Miller earlier. Are you really afraid to DFA Snead? I'm sorry, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yep.
I don't get it. It should have been reversed, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess where are you kind of at with that move that occurred today or yesterday, as of people listening to this?
Yeah, that's a great point too. And I think we talked about that on Twitter. Like each move in a vacuum, I can kind of understand. But then as a whole, like, yeah, what you're okay with DFAing Tyson Miller, but Kirby Snead, no, we gotta keep him. And listen, like I think Kirby Snead's actually been a little unlucky. I think he's had a couple bloops fall. Like I don't think he's terrible, but he's incredibly mid. No offense to Kirby Snead if he's watching this out there. You are much better at baseball than I am, trust me. But and I'm with you. Like, fine, if you got three lefties that are like prime Billy Wagner or something, or prime Josh Hader on the mound, then sure, I don't care what hand they are. But you've got three lefties that are. I don't get why you're afraid to DFA Kirby Snead in that situation when you clearly weren't afraid to DFA Tyson Miller. I get front offices tend not to want to DFA guys. Like, you're dealing with their livelihoods and everything. I get it. I do. I don't necessarily, in a vacuum, have a problem optioning Bizardo and keeping Snead. But it's just when you factor in every move, it's just very bizarre. And I think a lot of it, and I'm not trying to put all this on poor Gabe Spire here, but I think that's what's throwing a wrench into all this, I think, is his performance. They don't know what to really do. They're not going to option Spire because he's been really good for them for a year and the first month this year. They probably have some underlying numbers that indicate he's fine, but they're also a little bit worried. So they're having that extra lefty in the pen. So again, not trying to put like everything on Gabe Spire here, but I do think that's really thrown a wrench into it for them, for sure. But I think, like I said, if you look at each move just on its own, whatever. Bizardo wasn't great either. I'm actually a big Bizardo fan. I think he's got pretty good stuff. I was even talking on Twitter yesterday, with someone we were saying like maybe give Bizardo a chance to get these high leverage outs, and then he's gone. So who knows? But yeah, I just like you said, I think the bottom line with all those moves put together, why are you so willing to DFA Tyson Miller, but Kirby Snead seems to be like this protected guy on the roster a little bit, to an extent. So it's just very bizarre. And I think the injuries and some of the underperformances, I don't want to say have confused the team, but I think they're kind of like they don't really know what to do right now. I think they're struggling with how to get this bullpen right.
Yeah. So with that said, I do think we'll end this bullpen talk out now with the pieces that we have now, because I'm not going to get into trade talks and who we should get, blah, 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 because I'm not that smart once again. But going into the pieces that we do have right now in the bullpen, what needs to change? Because I think some of the problem is who we're using in what situation. In my opinion, now with Taylor Saucedo back, obviously that helps a bit. I know Taylor Saucedo isn't some, huge high leverage lefty for sure or anything like that. But last year, towards the end of the year, he was starting to get some of those high leverage outings. I most notably that comes into my head against the Angels. I think he faced Ohtani and struck out Ohtani in a really pivotal point in that one of those games. So in my opinion, I think you need to kind of put Spire back down and put Saucedo into those outings you would usually give Spire until Spire kind of gets right again, because I do think that Gabe Spire is going to come back and have a good solid season. It's just, when is that going to happen? I don't know. I don't think he's totally broken. So I think you need to start putting Saucedo in more of those higher leverage lefty outings. I think he has the stuff where he could make it work. And I'm sorry, but Saucedo, I think, fires up everyone when he's on the team and when he comes into games. So I think that certainly helps a bit too. Obviously Munoz needs to remain your closer, remain your really high guy to really, finish out those games. But it's kind of like, other than that, like, who do you go to? Do you go to Stanek? Which before Sunday's game against the Nationals, I would have said Stanek. Like, you need to start putting Stanek in instead of Thornton, because at least Stanek has that K possibility. He has the strikeout and the swing and miss in his game. Not sure where I fall on that. I also don't think Thornton's the option clearly, unless there's no one on base, it feels like. And even when there is no one on base, he's kind of given up some bombs now. So I don't know if it's Austin Voth. It's just like outside of Munoz and a little bit of Saucedo, I don't know who else you go to, but I do think you need to start putting Spire a little bit further down in the order of who comes in. Um, I actually saw a very interesting reply to one of my tweets earlier today that I thought was a very interesting choice, and I'm curious what your take is on this. They said call up Hancock to the bullpen to be that long reliever when one of our starters doesn't go, more than 5 innings. He can eat 3 innings in the middle of a game to get to your Staniks, your Munozes, your Saucedos at the very end. Kind of an interesting idea, I'm not going to lie. Now, I will say that if you put a starter in to a reliever role, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a good reliever. Not every starter is going to be a good reliever. And the part of that is because before every start, starters have their routine that they get into. They have their certain warm-ups before the game. They start their days differently. I mean, if you talk to any starter at the major league level, on their bump days, that whole day is scheduled out. The whole day. Clayton Kershaw, I think, once said that he takes a nap before every game at a certain time, and then, with an hour out, goes out. I don't know. So, not saying Hancock probably has some crazy schedule that he does, that's probably more reserved for your aces, your big boys, but that it's still a difference in scheduling and routine that could work fine, or it may not work out very well. But I'm curious, what do you think about that thing? I just wanted to put that in there, even though I know it's not going to happen, but I just thought it was a fun little thing to think about.
I think another fun pregame routine, I don't know if he still does it. Justin Verlander used to eat the same Taco Bell meal before every start. I don't know how you could do that and still pitch, but I mean, I do love Taco Bell, so I won't hate on it at all. So, going back to the first point, I think you're spot on with Saucedo. I think he's got to be your top lefty out of the bullpen, and I think he will be. Saw him warming up Sunday against the Nationals. I think that's the most clear, obvious one until Spire gets right. And I'm with you. I think Spire's going to be fine, but I think he needs some low leverage outings to get himself just his confidence back going. I would even be willing, like I said a few minutes ago, I'd be willing to get a little crazy and use Munoz in more of the Matt Brash role and have him come into those tight 7th innings and then try to go to somebody else in the 9th. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I don't know. And then, yeah, like you said with Stanek, it's like, as soon as I go, that was me yesterday. I'm like, okay, Stanek's the guy. You got to go to Stanek in these spots. And they go to Stanek today, and he gives up the 3-run home run. I'm just like, you can't win. And it's why I don't jump on Scott too much with this bullpen management right now. It's got to be difficult. I wouldn't, we're talking about, like, I don't know what to do. So I can't jump on him. Now, he's paid to do it. I'm not. We're not. But I don't envy it. It's not easy to have to try and figure out how to manage this bullpen right now. In terms of the Emerson Hancock idea, listen, I'm open to anything. So I will not shoot down any idea that's outside of like, hey, let's have Mitch Garver pitch, but yeah, sure, I think that could work. But my issue with that would be Hancock's your 6th starter right now, and the rotation's dialed in, but Brian Wu does have injury issues and injury history. He may have to miss some starts. God forbid something happens to Logan, Kirby, and Gilbert. You need that other starter. Now, I think Hancock coming in and pitching like 3 innings wouldn't prevent him from still being able to be that 6th starter. So I think it's an interesting idea, and I do think Hancock's arsenal could profile well to the bullpen, to be perfectly honest. But I think they're in a tough spot right now because they need that 6th starter to kind of be there in case something happens. And you do have Dallas Keuchel, and I think Casey Lawrence is still down there. And Jonathan Diaz is a guy I know Ty and Colby have talked about a bunch on Locked On. He's looked really good. He could be someone that fills that role. So, I mean, I'm open to anything. I really am. Like I said, outside of like, hey, Julio's going to be our new pitcher. If it works, I think this team's in first place. Even like if this team was completely out of contention, I would say no. You need to develop Emerson Hancock as a starter and stick with that. But listen, if it can bring you a World Series ring, then go for it, you know? So I'm open to any options that would help this team work right now. I wouldn't turn my nose up at any decision Scott made. If he, like I said, if he was like, hey, we're bringing Munoz in the sixth because bases are loaded, worth a shot. We're bringing Emerson Hancock up. He's going to be our kind of Chris Davinsky role, long reliever that's got good stuff. Sure, go for it. I don't know what, you know, so I'm open to anything right now, honestly. I don't think it'll happen, though. I don't think they're going to do that.
Okay, well, that is going to be it for today's episode, whatever you want to call it, video, a bit of a state of the union on where the Seattle Mariners are at right now in the 2024 season. We are a third of the way through. Do want to say they are still first place in the AL West, which is awesome. They still have an above 500 record at 28 and 26, so can't take that away from them. And I know we've talked about all of the shortcomings in the roster right now. Got to put it out there. They're still first in the AL West, and tonight, when you're watching this, a big series is about to start with the Houston Astros. It's going to matter a lot because we can either get a really huge lead on them and also helps us in the head-to-head standings between them, or the gap could shorten depending on how things go. But yeah, Jay, I appreciate you coming on to kind of do this really very long-winded, but I think we covered just about every narrative and topic there is on this team. So thanks for stopping by and putting in your opinions on it. It's really appreciated.
Of course. Thanks for having me, man. Anytime. Always enjoy our conversations. This was refreshing. It needed to be talked about with this team. And like I said, listen, we're in first place. And you know what? If you would have told me on Memorial Day they'd be in first place, I'd take it. So big series coming up. Let's win it and let's get this team to the postseason.
Yep, so that's going to be it for today's video here. Obviously, all of Jay's links are going to be in the description as normal, so you need to go follow him or subscribe to him. And then if you're new to my channel, subscribe. It helps me out a lot. It's free. Like the video as well. And comment down below what your general opinions are about either something specifically we talked about or the Mariners as a whole. I'd love to hear from you. That's going to be it for me in this one, and I will see you in the next.